Good afternoon. I'm John Hart, the co-founder of the Conservative Coalition for Climate Solutions and the executive editor of our news magazine, C3. Welcome to the Right Voices interview series, where we talk to conservative leaders who are protecting America's natural and economic environment. Today, we're honored to be joined by U.S. Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. Senator Braun was elected in 2018 after a very successful career in business, and he serves on the Aging Committee, Ag Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, and what's going to be relevant to our conversation today, especially, he serves on the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Senator Braun, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program.
My pleasure to be on.
Well, before I want to talk about your earmark amendments, and as some people know, as I was Tom Coburn's longtime communications director, I've been working on this issue for a long time. And Senator, you're very unique in the Senate in that you're focusing both on fighting pork and protecting the planet. But I think to most Americans, that's a very normal place to be. So before we talk about spending, tell us some about your background as a conservationist and how you came to care so much about the issue of environmental stewardship.
So as I turned into being a true conservationist, which would have been later in life, I was just one kind of mesmerized by Mother Nature. I'll never forget staring out my fifth grade window and noticed in the home next to the school there was a big birdhouse that had a lot of birds flying around it. And of course, that was a lot more interesting to me than whatever subject matter we were on. Investigated quickly. When I'm interested in something, most of what you learn in life, I found you do it probably outside the classroom anyway. And that day I learned about it. Had my dad, who managed a office furniture company there in town, his 35 years of the 39 years that he spent working at that same place, he had his foreman build me a Martin house. So I became a Martin landlord. I look forward to that. I now have gourds, put the pine needles in them this past weekend. They'll be coming back from the Amazon here pretty well in sync every year with the first warm week or two, which now, speaking of climate, that used to be very anecdotal, probably not the way you should analyze it. That was the first week of April. Now it's the second to third week of March. So when I go home this weekend, I should see some scouts. So it went from there to hunting and fishing. My dad gave me a shotgun when I was 10 years old. Shot my first squirrel when he took me to a woods unattended. That was the culture. I got my first squirrel. So I squirrel hunt, rabbit hunt, dove hunt, fish more than anybody possibly can. And you develop that affinity. And then when I decided to move back after business school, getting a finance degree, highly degreed, didn't use any of that, would have head to Wall Street. My wife and I decided to move back to our hometown. I wanted a place in the country because of that affinity for Mother Nature. Fell in love with sustainable timber management, live on 260 acres. Since the late 80s, I've been reinvesting in land. My wife would say, when are we going to take a vacation, dear? I'd always say next year. She knew that all of our extra cash was going into land investments. It worked out wonderfully. It's my therapy now with my new job. And then when Chris Coons, I think, exhausted every Republican senator and was going after the rookies sometime in like August, maybe of 2019, he said, by the way, Senator Braun, are you interested in forming a climate caucus? Almost walked away before I could tell him, yes, I would be, because he didn't think that would happen. So I said, he couldn't believe it. And he said, do you think you can find any other Republicans? I said, give me a couple months and I'll get 5 or 6 others. Got 6 others to join. And we've been active from October of 19 to the present. In fact, have a dinner scheduled this evening with some evangelical points of view interested in climate. Youth, faith, and farming all line up in that conservative niche that want us to be something other than the party of no or I'm not interested.
Yeah. Well, speaking of values lining up, I think what's really important and valuable about your leadership and example is that you bring the natural environment, economic environment, and those messages in harmony. So one of the things you did last week that got some attention is The Senate, just for background, there was an earmark ban put in place in 2011 after, my former boss, Tom Coburn, John McCain, and others fought against what Jack Abramoff called the earmark favor factory, this sort of, system of special interest giveaways, favoritism. And there was a bill that came up, an omnibus bill. You offered an amendment to strip the earmarks from that. I think there were about 5,000 worth about $10 billion. And you got 35 votes, which actually was more than twice as many as Tom Coburn got when he tried to kill the bridge to nowhere. So walk us through your thinking of here you are, a very successful businessman. You care deeply about conservation, and you decided to force a vote on something that is a difficult issue to take on. But walk us through your thought process on earmarks.
Conservation in life has a lot more relevancy just beyond Mother Earth herself. It's the way you lead your life. And I come from a German Catholic upbringing, arguably socially and fiscally the most frugal place in the state of Indiana. So it's kind of in your DNA, but it all blends together. And when I built my company, I reinvested every penny. I never pulled anything out of it. I always kept a clean, conservative balance sheet. Again, metaphorical to the climate side of life as well. And I found that when you did that, along with being enterprising, maybe for new sources of revenues that we earn in the business world, revenues are given to us here in this institution. That's a piece of cake to maybe figure out how you spend less than the taxpayers give you. But when it came to the earmarks, that was no big deal to me. I'm a big believer in term limits. I think that's the only mistake the founders made. They never imagined people would love the job of being a senator or a representative more than what they did before it: farmer, surveyor, business owner. Washington Jefferson hurried back to the farm when they would have had all the opportunity to do otherwise. So that was actually fun for me to take something that it was funny because once I got into the amendment, I cited, if you have any love for the institution, you ought to be for not running it into the ditch in the long run. And of course, Pat Leahy, who's been here 48 years, said, Senator Braun, I'm the dean of the institution and I love the institution. And then immediately segued into a justification for earmarks. Of course, I was being talked over when I was presenting my 1 minute argument. He got an ovation from about half of the Senate. That again is symptomatic of what's wrong with the place. At least 35, including John Tester, one Democrat, know that what I'm saying makes sense. They just don't have the political will. That's the biggest issue to do something about it.
Right. Well, I'll give you one point of encouragement is when Coburn got 15 votes for his Bridge to Nowhere amendment, even some of our biggest supporters in the media, Bob Novak said it was a fool's errand. They would never get rid of earmarks. But Coburn said then, and he was right, that 85% of the country was with them or more. And so I think the same is true today. So on the climate issues, how, there are multiple earmarks in this bill related to clean energy, climate. What do you say to your colleagues? You say, well, if you look, Senator Braun, if you really care about the environment, why are you getting all spun up about a few earmarks in this bill? What's the big deal? Isn't there?
Well, that's because anybody that would say that loves their policy that they're interested in more than how you'd pay for it sustainably. How you'd end up running a business like I did for 37 years, and three of my four kids learned well because our best years were through COVID. But when you reinvest, when you don't have phony financing, when you're not borrowing from the future to do things that you think are the next best idea or two, you're getting things mixed up. So for climate to be sustainable and actually rolling it out, when you then become the Debbie Downer and say, well, we're borrowing 30% of every dollar we spend, and of every new dollar, it's 100%. So then they'll say, well, what do you even mean there? I said, yes, we borrow 30% of what we spend every year, and every dollar, once you pass 70%, you're borrowing every dollar of it.
Right.
And it confuses them. But for people that really think thoughtfully, they're going to know, even on climate, that if we're going to do it right, we got to do it in a way that's going to work long term, that takes into account realities that half the world is not paying attention to it at all. China, most importantly, still building a coal-fired plant weekly. So many inconsistencies, contradictions. And the bill that Tom would probably be from up above really wondering how I got a climate bill through 92-8.
Right. Right.
That surprised me, but it was based upon—
And that's the Growing Solutions Climate Act.
Yes.
Yeah.
If our side came on board because no new federal dollars, it took the irony of liberal carbon offset markets and took the least partisan part of this government that I've seen, which would be agriculture and farmers, and it all made sense to try it there. It'll be, I hope it gets through on the House side. It would at least set the stage for both sides working. The other side will never get away from borrowing from their kids and grandkids, because they're political enterprisers. They love the federal government. It's their cathedral. I'm like the founders. I like my job better, what I was doing before, than being a senator. And that gives me a lot of freedom to do things different from your cardboard cutout here.
You got it. Well, one thing Coburn would say all the time is, only trust politicians who take this job as a demotion. In other words, if somebody had a life and career outside and they're
That's
walking away from that,
way of looking
you're
at
going to
it.
be liberated to do the right thing. So one of the phrases you've used quite a bit, and you use it in your floor speech, is the idea of merit-based spending. So I think there's a lot of confusion about what an earmark is. So I don't want to get in a legal definition, but essentially, and tell me if you view this the same way, is that you can spend money two ways. You can either have a merit-based, competitive-based system, which I suspect is what you did in your business career, or you can have—
Otherwise, the market would take you out.
Right. Exactly, the market would take you out. Yeah. But this whole idea of earmarks is member-based, where it's sort of done on member whim. Jeff Flake had a phrase he would use. He called it walking around money, where members would just kind of decide what they would spend money on. And is that a fair characterization of how
Ben Sass called it fiscal jackassery. I don't know.
That's pretty good.
It is all of that, and it is symbolic of what's wrong with the place. I'm on the budget committee. Bernie Sanders is the chair of the budget committee. We did not have one conversation within it to even structure a budget resolution in a way that had any input that should be the foundation for a reconciliation bill, let alone to do what you do in all other state governments. The budget committee and the construction of the budget is within the framework of a statutory balanced budget law or a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution. We have none of those guardrails, and plus they don't have a printing press in the basement. So earmarks to me are just how things try to morph back into what will carry you across some type of hard reconciliation into the ditch, similar to a Chapter 11 kind of process that you have to go through. And no one here seems to care, shrug their shoulders. Only 3 of us consistently vote against any policy, even if we like it, if it's got a fake pay for. And I'll give a shout out to Senator Lee, Senator Paul. And the other fiscal conservatives fall into the unholy alliance of this place. They're defense hawks. It's the most important thing in my mind that the federal government should do, but I don't hold it sacrosanct. They should be doing budgets. They should be subject to audits, and they're just as wasteful there as the rest of the government is. So they then lose sight of the fact that they're giving the quid pro quo to the Democrats, who, again, political entrepreneurs, enterprisers, never taken finance 101. This is their cathedral. Now you're enabling them to seize the moment, which they tried to do with these $1 trillion worth of spending proposals.
Yeah, and one thing that was striking to me too, Senator, is that you're on the not just the budget committee, but the appropriations committee. So back 10, 15 years ago, the appropriators were really in control of the earmark process. So it was even shocking to me that you as an appropriator were boxed out of the earmark process. And do you believe, do your colleagues understand how unprecedented that is? Are they aware of the
No, they probably think, why haven't we brought him back sooner? Number one. And when I heard the applause right before the vote for Pat Leahy, who I've gotten to know him well, been here, I think 48 years. And I say things like this as well. A lot of smart people here, just not the real cream of the crop that could fix the place and that are bought into because they've been part of it. They don't want to even acknowledge certain reforms that need to be made. That legacy will be fleshed out once they're gone. And it could have all been prevented by some fairly simple ideas like Rand Paul's penny plan. Or if I had the task of bringing an organization into health by cutting somewhere between 5 and 10%, that'd be a piece of cake without affecting its ability to do what it's supposed to do. That is so far removed from the real world of local and state governments and the free market system that pays all the bills currently. And sooner or later, you're going to wear it out with regulation and asking too much of it.
Well, and one of the assumptions you keep stating, and it's in all of your speeches and comments, is this whole idea of choices and offsets and priorities. So one of the, I think, effective ways that Coburn fought this was he would force choices and set up essentially fund this or fund that type of amendments on the bridge to nowhere. The bridge to nowhere wasn't just to take money away from Alaska. It was about shifting those dollars, $223 million, from Alaska to a bridge, and that was damaged by Hurricane Katrina. So he repeated that process really hundreds of times. I guess, is there an appetite? You've shown leadership. Is there an appetite for you and others to create those discrete choices and to put the Senate on record?
I wish I could
set priorities in public.
I wish I could consult Tom right now, and that worked then. But sadly now, your only options would be to hold a bill or take the government into shutdown. And I'm not prepared to do that because Republicans always are explaining why it was their fault. Again, because the other side's more fleet-footed than we are politically. The American public has gotten used to the free stuff. I call it drinking the federal Kool-Aid, and they love these earmarks. Senators that had earmarks also were handing out cards of how they were benefiting even those of us that don't like them. I think mostly to say, hey, it's hypocritical, you're against them, you're getting benefits from them. Many cases that spill over into the omnibus bill, especially. They were doing that, talking about this $1.5 trillion monstrosity, how much of it was going to help your state. Now, now you don't have, I think, maybe some of the technical tools that were there, because if it was as easy as forcing a true pay-for, I'm guessing that had to be somewhere in the construct of maybe caps, sequestration. We don't have that anymore. They're most ingenious here of once they put some restrictions, when they have a temporary epiphany about the future, and they unravel them almost as quickly as they had the political will to put them in place. So now there aren't any of those tools other than you can talk about them, that they don't have true pay-fors. Or you can hold a bill and then try to elicit a vote like I did on the omnibus bill. Mike Lee did on defunding vaccine mandates.
Right. Well, to offer you some encouragement, I think, even though it may seem a little bit challenging now, is when the public becomes aware of these dynamics, you never underestimate what an angry mob of voters can do, and that's what we saw in 2010. And so I anyway appreciate your leadership on it. And in the couple of minutes we have left, Were you able to hear President Zelensky's speech today? And do you have any thoughts
Yes.
on his on the situation in Ukraine, but where we go from here to lower gas prices, and also, in your view, did bad climate policy embolden Vladimir Putin? If so, and how?
Brings in a lot of what we've talked about. Just go back to the Democratic debates, and I recently saw Biden pointing at one of his opponents about how he was going to manhandle fossil fuels. You know, they were each competing over who was going to put that sector of energy out of business first. Well, immediately look at the signal that was sent with the Keystone XL pipeline, stopping any new permits on federal ground. Putin, sharp observer, I'm sure paid attention to that, knew enough about how that would play into that dependency issue. The Europeans, to me, have been so long underfunding defense in their own backyard. Again, I think the most important thing you should do as a federal government, they actually probably run more balanced budgets just with a higher level of government in it already over there. But they only spend roughly about, maybe 1.5% on defense. So Germany's just stepped up to do more about that. Trump had an approach, I think, that worked. Pay your own bills for defense. We cannot afford being the policeman, the defender of the entire world, especially when we're running $1.5 trillion deficits. Everything that Biden has done in terms of ending our energy independence, that probably was done for climate. In the long run, the cleanest, least expensive fuel is going to win, and we should all be for it. I'm, by the way, for pulling all subsidies, tax credits, and that kind of stuff away from all industries in the long run. Sadly, we learn lessons the hard way, and they will in the midterms, because gasoline alone, even if you don't have general inflation at 8%, going above $3, headed to where you eclipse 4, that's enough to lose about everything you're running for. And then the question will be, how bad will it be in 2024 when we have the presidential election? So yes, climate is something we got to be smart about. We got to do it within our financial capabilities. We got to do it to where you're going to get buy-in, similar to the Growing Climate Solutions Act bill, not to where you're saying arbitrarily, I'm going to put you out of business. Look how that boomeranged to hit you in the head politically, in what it did to fuel the worst of inflation on energy and so forth.
Yeah, and we in our organization has hammered the point that free economies are twice as clean as less free. So the worst climate solution is to have a dictator in power, whether it's in China, whether it's in Russia. And so I think, we've seen the consequences in a very tragic way of emboldening those policies.
One good piece of good news, because anybody listening would think that we need to dig a hole and crawl into it, both maybe when it comes to climate, especially when it comes to this federal government, this biggest business in the world. And I think that is probably worth worrying about, because I don't see enough of me being here. And when you would wake up, it'll probably be closer to a chapter 7 than a chapter 11, right, in a bankruptcy metaphor. But healthcare, Tom talked about that. I'm the loudest mouth on reforming healthcare, just not having Bernie Sanders in charge of it, which is more federal government. They are not a free enterprise industry that embraces transparency, competition. There are barriers to entry, and you certainly don't have a sophisticated consumer. I created a sophisticated consumer in my own business and opened it up to the limited transparency out there, cut costs 60% 15 years ago, and have only had 2% increases. And we avoid the healthcare system by spending on wellness. That's a solution. Right. Healthcare industry fights it tooth and nail. Energy, all the CEOs know and are buying into it, even the Exxons, and they know as well that it's going to take technology and innovation not a heavy-handed federal government. They've all told me that, and they're doing more than what you'd imagine in the private sector: advanced nuclear technology, hydrogen fuel cells, even fusion someday, being a process, along with, other ways that we can try to take technology and the thing we do best, rather than doing it by arbitrary, saying you're going to do this or that through the federal government.
Yeah. Well, Senator, I'm glad you brought up healthcare, because you and I have talked about this before, and this is a point I make to conservatives and Republicans all the time, is that, we can't afford to make the same mistakes in the climate energy space as we made in healthcare. So, Tom Coburn had a plan. A few Republicans did have plans, but there was never the leadership buy-in to this idea that we had to have an alternative. And I think that's different now with the issue of climate. Actually, there is a lot of leadership and buy-in kind of up the chain of command, if you will, within the Republican Party. That's a good thing. And because you're right,
there is out in the private sector. Our caucus, sadly, just recently, Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott. Rick's been a good friend. He came in the same time I did. He ran a business and then was governor of Florida. We would believe that you need an agenda. You can't be the party of no, or I'm not interested. And you got to also, if you're calling yourself fiscal, responsibility folks, you got to practice what you preach. And I think that's the key for Republicans, to actually replace the political enterprisers that Democrats are, that believe in none of that. And I think that the American public is really interested in that, especially young conservatives and Republicans. When they asked me to keynote their convention in Indianapolis, it wasn't for any other issue other than I've stuck my neck out on climate in a kind of innovative, technological way, not more government.
Well, Senator, you've stuck your neck out on lots of issues, and I can tell you that a lot of your colleagues may not be thrilled with it, but I can guarantee you there are millions and millions of taxpayers and just regular people who care deeply about these issues and see how they're integrated in their daily lives. So thank you for your leadership. Is there any other points you wanted to make before I let you go?
No, I think that I think for us to really have our day in court, it's going to take that pushing folks to get involved in politics. Don't make it your career. My staff doesn't like it because I generally don't listen to them, because on the issue we're on, agriculture, healthcare, something in government finance, I've been through it before in the real world. And I think the later you get into it, the more you'd be able to bring to the table. And we got to get rid of career politicians here. When we do run into the ditch, or if we could do it before, that polls 85 to 90% as well, along with full transparency in healthcare. Term limits do. And we need to get all that put together. And I think we could be in a better mood here in terms of what the future looks like, especially as it's impacted by the biggest business in the world, the federal government.
So getting rid of pork is a great climate solution. Term limits is a great climate solution as well. So
it is.
We appreciate that. So again, I'm John Hart, the co-founder of C3 Solutions. We've been with Senator Mike Braun. Senator, thanks so much for your leadership. Viewers can follow us at c3newsmag.com and Senator Braun's website as well. So Senator, thank you so much, and good luck on all these fights.
Thank you.